Welcome to Discograffiti, the music podcast that delivers the objective truth about the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever existed. But first things first, before we get into the chum of the evening. Wait, it's not chum that I'm looking for. Is that quite the word, actually? No. It is actually really far from what I was intending. You need to know just how seriously we take this.
Discograffiti is heavily researched, and the music is always reassessed with fresh ears.
In fact, this morning I listened to this today's artist's discographical output yet again, a second time through. And by the way, we're not just covering albums. No, we do a deep dive analysis of EPs, singles, comp tracks.
And then every release is rated 1 to 5, an objectively accurate 1 to 5, actually 0 to 5 star ratings. There is an occasional 0.
There is a delicious 0. And that allows us all to come face to face with the true shape of an artist's overall arc.
In today's episode of Discograffiti, we'll be turning the spray cans on Betty Davis.
Behind the scenes jazz fusion tastemaker turned now you see her, now you don't, hardcore funk dynamo. So this morning's guest is the author of the novel The Final Revival of Opal and Nev. The awesomeness of publishing a great book notwithstanding, we're going to leave it to her to explain why she's taken time away from her joyous post-Omicron Sunday afternoon to talk about the great late Betty Davis. Lads and ladies of Discograffiti City, please extend a warm yet completely silent welcome to Dawnie Walton.
Hi, so welcome great to be here. Thank you so much. And I hope this conversation does not rate 0.
Our guests are never rated.
Thank God.
We had this episode planned for quite a while. Months ago, really, we had kind of chatted with you about doing this, and since then, of course, Betty has passed. Just a few weeks ago, I couldn't help but notice in the coverage of her passing, and some of the obituary stuff that we had read. Almost every time in the first sentence it mentions that she was Miles Davis's wife, and which is kind of ironic because really it really should have been the other way around. The influence she had on him. Some of his greatest music, his most significant music, has her fingerprints directly on it. It wouldn't have happened without her being in his life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one of the things that I think was so interesting about her story is sort of this thing about her that she was like a muse for him, but honestly, like she was so much more than that. First of all, she was an artist in her own right, but the way that she sort of influenced his whole style and sound and making it more electric and more with the times,
and more accessible. Yeah,
totally. And they only were together, I think, for a year. And I think he said something like she was too wild for me, which is quite a thing for somebody like Miles Davis to have said.
Yeah.
So she's just a fascinating figure.
Also, interestingly enough, she served as a muse to you as well. So in your novel. Yeah. It was really an amalgam, right? It was Nona Hendrix, Betty Davis, and
Grace
Jones.
Grace Jones, that's right.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us how what piece of the character Betty Davis inhabits?
Sure, and I have to confess that Betty Davis is an artist that I've only learned about in very recent years. And I had actually started writing this novel before she came into my consciousness. So, I grew up a young Black woman who was into rock and roll and really sort of hungry for images of people who look like me making this kind of music. And of course, coming up, we had Living Color and Bad Brains and all that. But no, as far as I know, no very prominent Black woman that was very clearly kind of like labeled as a rock artist. And so, looking back at the era of the late 60s and early 70s, I was interested in sort of like disrupting history a little bit by writing this fictional oral history and doing what I thought was kind of inserting a Black woman into that history without fully knowing that women like this actually existed, right? And so, I always, when I was thinking about the character of Opal, I was thinking at first about images. So I was thinking about Grace Jones, like someone who was very bold and in your face. And as I started doing research, that's when Betty kind of popped up and her story popped up. And the deeper I got learning about her and her life, her work, her boldness, her style, all of those things just really kind of influenced the character. And I think so much about her and her kind of struggles to make her own lane in the music industry, I think was something that was very appealing to me. And that was what I was interested in. And kind of also the fact that she was sort of unapologetically who she was. Mm-hmm. And no matter how it was taken, that's what she was going to do. And one of my favorite songs of hers is from her third album called Dedicated to the Press. And I just love this idea of an artist who was really head on taking on her critics in the music.
Taking on everyone. I mean,
taking just on everyone.
She's like the most supercharged of performance dynamos. If you see any footage, even if you just look at any of her album covers, it's almost like, I'm not going to tussle with this person.
Oh my gosh. And she was just so fantastically strange. Like that cover of They Say I'm Different. I mean, first of all, the title, They Say I'm Different, and then to see her in sort of this space age kind of leotard with it's just insane. And that was the kind of weirdness that I was looking for.
There's this great quote. Carlos Santana said, she was the first Madonna, but Madonna is more like Marie Osmond compared to Betty Davis. Betty was a real ferocious Black Panther woman. You couldn't tame Betty Davis.
Yeah. Yeah. And just that, like you said, that image that was sort of chameleon-like from album to album, but still the song so supercharged, so sexual, incredible.
The character of Opal Jewell in the novel sort of becomes a punk icon. That didn't really happen necessarily to Betty, but I see her kind of in that sort of, with that same iconoclast kind of rebellious mode. She kind of reminds me a little bit of Iggy Pop or somebody. That supercharged and sort of dangerous type of performance.
Yeah. And I think, I had trouble kind of figuring out what Opal would sound like. And I think Betty also helped me with that because her range, her going from a low growl to kind of shrill yelps in a single song.
Yeah.
The sort of way that she was willing to make her voice so gritty and ugly. And I think she herself didn't even call herself a singer. She said she was more of a vocalizer, I think she said. And I found that to be very interesting because the thing that I wanted for Opal is that it wasn't that she was a great singer. The character, her sister, is a better singer than she is. Mm-hmm. But it's about having that X factor.
Right.
We like to do this thing on The Sky Graffiti where we try to communicate at the top of the show, however poorly, what tonight's artist means to us. You kind of touched on that in that you didn't really know about her. And for me too. I mean, I was very musically hungry as a kid, always devouring books. There was no internet at that time. In fact, we only had horse and buggy to get around. But, I did buy Bitches Brew just based on the cover. And I remember how it entranced me as a kid. And then later learning that she clearly was the template for what I was hearing, what I was seeing, all that stuff, that not to take away from Miles, because obviously, he's no podunk in the genius department, but it's, and then even now, she's kind of the Lenny Bruce of Black female performers. I would say if you had to assign that to somebody, and you look at Megan Thee Stallion, one of the most popular performers in the world, and still Betty dies and continues to languish in obscurity, with just a few mentions. She'd be such a huge star today. I mean,
oh my gosh. Yeah. But it's so wild that once I did start digging in, there was sort of a cache of things for me to read and to watch. I think that documentary, They Say I'm Different, was out, and I went back and saw some of the talkbacks with the director, and there was Erykah Badu and there was the singer Joy talking about how much she influenced them. And it was like, wow, how have I never heard of this? How is it that I'm 40 years old and I'm just learning about this woman? And it just really speaks to kind of the hidden figures of Black women in rock and roll. Most of them got their start singing background, but here was a woman who had her own band, was her own sort of leader, and still I had never heard of her. And I feel like, the novel's been out almost a year and people are still kind of sending me little notes. Hey, have you heard of this person? Have you heard of that person? And it's all still education to me.
Mm-hmm. The first I became aware of her, that was from Miles's autobiography, in which he kind of throws her under the bus. But then, years, I hadn't heard her music until this is probably in the early 2000s. I was playing with Macy Gray, and she was a huge influence on Macy Gray, especially at that time. And, those records, this is, going back to almost 20 years, they weren't really very well known then, but got turned on to those records in that period. I had read about her before, but then actually hearing the records, they far exceeded my imagination of what she actually sounded like and what those records sounded like. They're way more wild and like feral and primal than I had really envisioned.
And Dawnie, I'm curious. I think it's easy to be fooled by that, public bravado that she had, because I read this Mojo article that wasn't that long ago, and those kind of antics seem to hide a really private persona that was marked by a lot of pain and trauma, maybe as a result of being held up as an object of fascination or a muse. I don't even know. But do you think that that side of her is greatly overlooked, or that's sort of the main thrust of who she is?
Well, I think one of the other things that strikes me about Betty Davis is that she was a woman of conviction, I think. And I think, again, I'm still learning so much about her, but from what I understand, like, she was very much wanting to have control of her own music and her own image and her own sound. And when that wasn't happening, like, it was kind of a wrap for her for a long time, you know what I mean? And it doesn't mean, however, that like her passion for the music went anywhere. In the obituaries for her death, I stumbled across someone had posted something recent that she'd written for another artist. She was always still writing.
That song is
awesome. Yeah. So it's just sort of heartbreaking that publicly she did have this, if you ever see very rare concert footage of her, there was some going around after her death. Mm-hmm. You see someone who is so fierce and so just like, you look at her and think like she could do anything, but to know that she did have those hurts and those vulnerabilities. And she did leave the business, I think, partly because she had some family issues. I think her father's death greatly affected her. But to know, that underneath all that bravado, there was something very tender. And I think that's another way that she influenced my character, Opal. That was another thing that I wanted to express, the difference between an image and reality.
Yeah, she was sort of an enigmatic personality, really. She's sort of, even people who knew her well, I just from reading some interviews and watching, did you happen to see the Tales from the Tour Bus episode?
I have seen that a while ago. Yeah,
that's really great.
Best love. Yeah.
So the guys in her band talking. She was definitely she had some definite idiosyncrasies as a person. It was a very unique kind of person, and seemingly very different from her from the stage persona, which makes the stage persona that much more brilliant. There was nothing really like it at all at the time. I mean, there was other funk music, but something with that kind of persona in front of it. It was really shocking to people, I think, in a way that people don't fully understand. Yeah,
here was a woman who was, kind of always ahead of her time, I think. And so the moment never quite met her. And I think that's part of the fascination that we have with her. And there's a nonfiction book that I talk about a lot because it was hugely inspirational. It came out when I was finishing edits on my book, but I read it and I was like, this is the book that I've been looking for. And it's called Black Diamond Queens by Maureen Mann. And there's a whole chapter in it dedicated to Betty Davis. The book is about the contributions of African-American women to rock and roll. And, I think we have this idea of Betty Davis being kind of a recluse, but that's not really the case. Like, she would grant you an interview, but she wouldn't really say much in the interviews. Right. And so, in the book, Maureen is sort of talking about like preparing for this interview and all these questions that she has and getting sort of one-word responses,
She kind of lays it all out in the music. She's not really holding back in there. I'm a complete nerd. Joe is a complete nerd. We've never spoken with you before, but the fact that you're combining musical personas in your characters and creating an Altamont type event in your book means you are a nerd, and I don't need to ask you. So was this book your way of getting that all out, or is this just part one of a never-ending series of nerdy music books?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think I put it all out in this book. This book combines many of my obsessions, music of the early 1970s and, the trajectories of Black women in the industry and my sort of takes on media and culture. And it's all those things that I was obsessed with at the time.
And I'm just gonna read this because this way you don't have to, and you can remain humble. Alexandra Jacobs' New York Times review kicks off with, "This novel is so good, I want to rent a velvet-swagged amphitheater and gather a large audience to blare through a microphone just how much I like it." You must have been thrilled when you read that.
Oh, gosh.
What did that feel like? Yeah.
Oh, well, that came out on my publication day, and I keep my phone by my bed, which is probably a mistake. But I knew that they had been planning. Yeah, they had been planning to do a review, but you never know how these things are going to go. And so, I woke up and I grabbed from my phone and I screamed, and my husband woke up and said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" It's good. It's good. The review is good. So,
have you ever even gotten past that sentence? That's just an all-timer. It really is.
It was really amazing. I was very honored.
So before we actually, before Joe and I actually launch into the discography of this legacy artist, is there a particular Betty Davis LP that particularly touched or inspired you to put pen to paper?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think They Say I'm Different. Probably just because it was the first one that I listened to. And I think I listened to that one several times before I dipped back into the self-titled debut and into Nasty Gal. But, that song, He Was a Big Freak, is so startling.
Yes.
Like, wait, what did she say? She used to beat him with a turquoise chain. Did she say that, really?
Yeah, she did.
And it was like a process of like rewinding, like, running it back and letting it play through, and then wait, running it back. And just the whole idea of, a Black woman in that time feeling like I'm a different kind of person and I'm proud of that. And here's sort of my swagger. Here's what I do.
Plus she produced it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a really special place in my heart for that record. But there's, probably my favorite songs are on the first one. Stepping in Her I. Miller's Shoes is a great song. If I'm in Luck, I Might Get Picked Up, of course, is a great one.
My favorite all-time song by her is The Lone Ranger.
Yeah.
I really like the vibe on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, songs like Anti-Love Song, when she gets a little quieter, it kind of makes you perk up and listen because it's so rare.
Yeah.
Most of her songs are on 11. Yeah.
And some of the lyrics are kind of, when you dig into them, there's kind of a lot going on in the lyrics. Like that one, I have a quote from those lyrics, like, what Anti-Love Song is really all about. Because I know you would make me suffer. I know you could drive me mad when it got real. I know you'd disappear. That's why I ain't gonna love you. Because I know you like to be in charge. Well, with me, you couldn't control me, don't you? There's a lot to dig into in a lot of these songs. It's the dynamics between her and whoever the other person is that she's involved with in the song, what she's saying. There's,
and I think, that kind of attitude, it's influential not just for generations of, like Black women coming after her, but also, like punk and Riot Girl and kind of like very feminist kind of music.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, this Discography trawl is really, it really is mainly a corrective measure in the collective unconscious version of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that is, because simply, Betty deserves a place in the Pantheon on a shelf no lower than Miles's.
Agreed.
Dan, do you hear the thud of that piece of concrete that I just threw on the ground? We're going to edit in a sound effect. Thank you so much for joining us. And, anybody listening, please pick up the book. Do yourself a favor.
Yeah, to our listeners, this book should really be right up your alley. It's it's a fictional oral history. It's set in a fascinating time and place, and it's really told through the medium of rock journalism. There's that aspect of the book as well. So our fans of the show, you're going to get all the references, and you're going to really enjoy the book. So Go check it out.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on Discography.
All righty.
Thanks, Dawnie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
One more quote from Miles Davis. If Betty were singing today, she would be something like Madonna, something like Prince, only as a woman. So let's get up to the year 1964 as quickly as possible. So Betty was born in 1945, according to most people, although she claims 1944. She was born Betty Mabry in Durham, North Carolina. On her grandmother's farm in Reidsville, North Carolina, she listened to tons of blues musicians. At 16, she left for the Fashion Institute of Technology, soaked up all kinds of Greenwich Village stuff, music, culture, the works, appeared as a model in 17 Ebony, Glamour, and other publications. And in her time in New York, met a whole bunch of musicians, including Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone, which are seed planters, and we'll figure out why momentarily.
So just in general, super groovy place to be. Cafe Was happening, all the folkies. The Greenwich Village in the 60s is like, it's like the pinnacle of culture for all of time.
Right. She's making her way.
She's right in
doing
there.
All kinds of stuff, visual, meeting up with musicians. And her music career was actually started through her friendship with a soul singer named Lou Courtney, who produced her first single, The Cellar. I wasn't able to find her debut single. It was from '63. I'm sure it's amazing. It was a local jam for The Cellar. But
if anybody's got a link to it or something, send it to us.
Please write in either at the Facebook discussion group or you can send it through Spotify. So her first professional gig wasn't until she wrote Uptown to Harlem for the Chambers Brothers. But her first single that I heard is 1964's Get Ready for Betty, backed with I'm Gonna Get My Baby Back.
Sassy single right off the bat.
Totally right. I mean, it's a mission statement, for Christ's sake.
It's pretty much straight up R&B, but it's got some grit to it in the track, and it's a catchy song, and it's got the attitude right.
Right. It's kind of a girl group thing actually, but with more grit and gut bucket soul coursing through it than you'd find in something like that. Of course, released as Betty Mabry, who she was at the time. This is a great single. This will be on the playlist for sure.
Yeah, 5 stars for me on this single.
4.5 for me because we got to go from somewhere to somewhere. That's the
now you're
only
doing my
reason
thing.
I'm doing your thing. I can't help but get symbiotic with you, man. All right, so in 1968, we just fast forward a few years. She's still involved with Hugh Masekela, and she recorded several songs for Columbia Records with Masekela doing arrangements. And a couple of those were released as a single in 68. On the A side, you have Live, Love, Learn, backed with It's My Life. And I mean, these are awesome. So Live, Love, Learn is string-enhanced soul, very easily digestible. Not like her later stuff. It's My Life is very slick and horn and blazoned, but really, really good. A path not taken for her.
Yeah, I love the A side. It's one of my most favorite things she did. And you're exactly right. A path not taken.
Right.
More kind of conventional R&B, but really nice song.
She does it so well.
She sings in kind of a more conventional style on these recordings. I mean, she didn't really find her signature style until kind of later in the 70s. But she's still terrific. She's a really charismatic singer.
But like you look at Aretha Franklin or Marvin Gaye or these other singers that had been for years doing a different type of music than what they were best at, and those records are kind of flat now.
Right.
These stand up. She still would have been great as this kind of singer, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the B side I didn't dig quite as much. The A side is really like Live, Love, Learn is really a special kind of gem.
Yeah.
I gave the single overall 4 stars.
I'll give it 4.5.
But yeah, definitely worth checking out.
So in '66, as Betty was modeling, she first met Miles Davis, who was 19 years older than her. At the time, he was separated, and Betty began dating him in early '68. They were married in September '68. They were married for a year. In that time, she really, really changed his sartorial and musical outlook. Wouldn't you say, Joe?
Yeah, so if you're a Miles Davis fan, 1968 is a pivotal year when everything really kind of changes for him. He sort of develops he's just kind of right in the middle of when he's got the electric quintet, and he kind of goes electric. But
before he did, he released Feed to Kilimanjaro, which has Mademoiselle Mabry, one of his best songs.
And she's on the cover.
Right. I mean, she's obviously, ruling the roost, sort of.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to in the interview with Dawnie that the first time I'd kind of even heard of her was in Miles's book. In his book, he kind of throws her under the bus by saying.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he said the marriage broke up because she had an affair with Jimi Hendrix, which he says is bullshit, and that the marriage ended because he was physically abusive.
Right,
kind of not really cool to make that accusation of her, which appears to be not true. She vehemently denies it.
To be fair, he does actually credit her with introducing him to all these, to Jimi Hendrix. Stone,
she still comes off pretty cool in the book.
Yeah. He may have thrown her under the bus for the marriage, but as far as
he does give her
due,
proper credit for all the things that she turned him on to, for sure. Yes.
So then, in the spring of '69, Betty records a bunch of demo tracks with Miles and Tia Macero producing. So at least 5 songs were taped during those sessions. 3 were Betty Mabry originals. 2 were covers of Cream and Creedence. And Miles tried to use the songs to get a deal for Betty, but Columbia and Atlantic were not interested, and they were archived. Released in 2016 on the Columbia years 68 to 69 by Light in the Attic Records. Joe, what do you think about this record?
Well, it's super fascinating, if nothing else, for the mashup of musicians, because it's sort of a mashup of Miles's band. So, there are like electric jazz.
You got Herbie Hancock, John McLaughlin.
Larry Young on organ.
Wayne Shorter.
So all the Miles cats. And then the Jimi Hendrix rhythm section of the time with Mitch Mitchell and Billy Cox.
Right.
So it's kind of those two things mashed up together, and
which is insane. Imagine that being the band for your demos.
It is insane, and it sounds amazing.
It does.
Their playing is just totally incredible. Especially, you can detect some John McLaughlin riffing on there that is unreal. He's so
It is
good.
Unfairly hard to say his name.
It's unfair how good he is at the guitar.
There's a lot of things that are unfair about that guy.
He's really unreal. I always have a big smile on my face when I hear his little licks spiking through. They're always so tasty.
I don't really get the intermounting flame. I've tried, but it hasn't grabbed me yet.
Well, my favorite McLaughlin stuff is the stuff with Miles. Amazing playing on Bitches Brew,
In a Silent Way.
In a Silent Way.
That
Jack Johnson. There's unreal guitar
that stuff's
stuff
incredible.
Jack Johnson.
So this album, if I can call it an album, because it does have a vibe that's cohesive throughout. It sounds like a funk party hangout session. It's got a great vibe to it, and great touch. Miles talking in between takes, because at the end of the song Politician, Miles recommends over the talkback that she overdub on top of her vocal, and she fucking snaps at him like the badass I like to imagine her to be.
Overdub.
Yeah. It's so awesome. I mean, just that alone is worth the price of admission. Every single song on this is great. I give it 4.5 stars.
Yeah, I gave this a 4. Her vocals are a little bit subdued on it compared to what she would later do, but it's definitely a turn to the funk direction, away from soul.
Yes,
what she had done up to this point was really soul, and this was really embracing funk like fully.
So that growly vocal affectation that Dawnie was imitating earlier, that is not yet in place. She has not yet developed that style of singing, but keep in mind this is 4 and 5 years before the first album.
Now the thing that is in place is kind of her style as a writer, which is to kind of come up with a funk groove kind of to create a funk backdrop and then kind of interpolate a song over that. It's kind of in the style of what James Brown does.
Right.
He kind of makes that kind of groove, makes the
Yeah, they're
insane
kind
thing
of
to
not.
like,
They're like borderline songs. They're more like vamps.
Right.
Right. I mean,
right. And
not
she kind
just
of, and
these,
this is a style that she kind of stuck with.
She stuck with this.
through making her records.
She just changed the way she did it, but otherwise the writing style was there.
Yeah, if you've seen the Tales from the Tour Bus episode, there's a scene where she's kind of would sing the little riff into a tape recorder, and that's how she would write, and she would kind of show it to the musicians, and they would kind of cop the riff, and that's kind of how these songs were born. But yeah, some great gems on this one. The version of Politician Man, the Cream song, the Cream version is kind of like slow and lumbering, and this version slays it. It's so much better.
Yeah. Well, Cream had maybe 3 good songs.
Yeah, and it's the playing on this is so it's a much faster kind of rave up version, and it's like John McLaughlin's guitar.
Why don't you want to talk about how bad Cream is? You skipped right over that one. So after all this stuff, unfortunately, she doesn't get a deal. But that next year, Bitches Brew comes out, and again, she has a big influence. Miles was going to call it Witches Brew originally. Betty convinces him to call it Bitches Brew, which is odd because Joe isn't his favorite word bitch.
Yeah, he would say that all the time. I guess he'd call everybody bitch.
Yet for this album, it was going to be Witch for some reason. She's like, be true to yourself. Call it Bitches Brew.
It would have still been pretty good if it was Witches Brew, but Bitches Brew really does just like a little cherry on the sundae.
It is. And apocryphally about, a sort of nod to Betty and her girlfriends, apparently. So after the end of her marriage with Miles Davis, Betty moved to London around 1971. She was going to pursue a modeling career. So she was writing music while she was over there and dated Eric Clapton, who I guess he was in the middle of his heroin thing. Right? Yeah, he was like a shut-in. He was practicing for COVID lockdown, but with heroin.
He was always in the middle of something.
No, this was like post Derek Domino's pre-Rainbow Theater show, so he was like just doing heroin.
I'm sorry, you're boring me to death.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so
Eric Clapton is a fantastically boring human being.
Here's why she deserves this episode. Okay, this is all you need to know how cool she is. Eric Clapton wanted to collaborate with her, and she refused. Okay, how cool is that? Okay, anyway.
She's like, I play with John McLaughlin. Right. You suck.
So after about a year, she comes back to the States to intending to record with Santana, but instead she records her own songs with a whole bunch of awesome funk musicians on the West Coast. She writes and arranges all her songs. Joe, take it away, please.
Yeah, it's her debut album. She's got all the A-list West Coast, Bay Area funk guys. Greg Errico, Larry Graham, the rhythm section of Sly and the Family Stone. Neil Sean on guitar, who was in Santana. Merle
Pete
Saunders.
Sears.
A lot of all amazing players.
The Pointer Sisters doing background vocals.
And Greg Errico produced the record, and it has a really, of all her records, this one sonically is my favorite. It has a really thick,
it does
like heavy stomping funk sound, and the rhythm section, the Greg Errico, Larry Graham rhythm section, it's just magic. So, but beyond the sound of it, she has by this point really developed her style as a vocalist and a writer,
and just as importantly, her persona.
Right.
So she didn't really have a persona before, but right. I think she took the aspects of her personality that probably she found to be the most exciting, I'm guessing, and tussled them up and teased them out.
Yeah, so it's released in 1973, so a lot of things kind of coming together at the same time. It's like Black Power and second wave feminism and the sexual revolution, and she really kind of embodies all of it. And I guess this is technically her debut album, and
it was a minor hit. It wasn't totally obscure. It was number 54.
Right, but an incredible mission statement because she's just bursting out with all of it at the same time. The crazy persona and the her vocal style. We haven't really talked about it too much, but she's not really a very conventional singer. She's not really like she's not Aretha Franklin. She's not really that kind of like belted out like a diva singer. She's more of a vocal stylist, and it's more about her. She kind of relies heavily on sort of like the James Brown scream, but like turned into like a full instrument. She takes the hi and makes that into like a whole style of communication.
She keeps it within the words. She doesn't go She doesn't go glossolalia.
Right. She pronounces the words.
Yeah.
Kind of. So, with her discography, it can be a bit of a challenging listen because of that. It's not really super accessible music. It's very, but
if you're a funk fan and you don't know about this,
if you're into funk though, this is first rate, top notch funk. Like very greasy,
Yes, I'd like to point out
booty shaking.
I'd like to point out I've never been in a juke joint. However, this is thick, bass heavy grooves slathered with juke joint grease.
Yeah, I mean vibe to spare. Everybody's playing amazing. These records are like very legit funk records, just in their own right.
I mean, how do you even a few of the ones that that Dawnie pointed out? If I'm in luck, I might get picked up. The first song, anti-love song, Your Man, My Man, Stepping in Her I. Miller Shoes.
Well, if I'm in luck, I might get picked up. That's the first tune, and for its time, if you think about what the message of that song is. The message of that song is, yes, I'm going out and trying to get laid. That's pretty much what she's singing there. And that may not seem really that shocking now, but at the time, that was really quite a thing to say for a woman to put on a record.
Yeah.
And the amount of like raw sexuality dripping off it makes it even that much more kind of, really in your face. And it's basically like, hey, if you have a problem with it, please do go fuck off.
The funny thing is I can see how she might have thought this is going to be huge because you can't ignore this. But at the same time, the right wing that eventually shut her down and made it impossible for her to move forward in her career, they had the target on her forehead from the second she appeared on stage, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much of it is because of the content of the music and how much it is because of the style. Because, like as I was saying before, none of these are really like super radio friendly, kind of like catchy songs. They're,
Yeah, but the thing is, her songs were not played on the radio because of pressure from religious groups and the NAACP.
Right.
That's documented. So that's as uncompromising as they are. There were forces against her as well.
She was running into a headwind also.
Yeah, unquestionably. That one I give 4.5 stars. You could easily argue 5, but the trajectory of her discography is basically sort of in my mind, the perfection of a template,
right? Instead
of a constantly changing sort of thing. So what do you give it, Joe?
I would say exactly the same. I also gave it 4.5, but could easily be 5. It's a classic debut. And as like a debut that announces a certain type of persona, it's really fully. She's really very fully formed. Her persona on this, she really carried this through the next few records. The same kind of like character.
It's tweaks to the same kind of deal. So in the next year, 1974, They Say I'm Different, and this time out, Betty produced. And I mean, totally killed it. I totally fucking slayed it.
Right. So completely different musicians for the most part on this one. The star-studded West Coast band is gone, and this one is so as a result is a little bit less polished, I would say, and it's not really sonically quite at the same level as the last one. But this one is the sweet spot for me, where she's kind of got the lyrical concepts and the cool riffs. And it's all kind of like clicking and really coming together. The vision really is most together on this one.
It's like I think every song on this is a classic. I mean, there's no song on this that's not great.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same theme of sexual desire, but really the real theme is really just about freedom. It's really just about being completely free, and that's really the feeling I get when I hear this. It's the sound of a person who's
also
fully free.
All her covers are great. This is probably my favorite of her covers. It's sort of a twist on the Parliament Funkadelic Space thing.
Yeah.
But a distaff version, and she's, I mean, what a pose, what a picture. It's a great cover.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's her. We should talk a little bit about her look in general. We haven't really spoken about that in her stage persona. Silver hot pants, very skimpy outfits, big boots, giant afro. And
she's not just standing there; she's kicking and
so it's
thrashing around.
Extremely sexually charged type of performance. using the microphone as a phallic symbol, a lot of that kind of stuff. Definitely meant to shock. And, definitely had an impact on people. I think it was, a lot of people saw
I know I
it
discovered my special purpose. But you could easily make the argument that that at this point she was kind of at her peak. I mean, it didn't get better than They Say I'm Different. You could just argue it remained as good.
Right.
Wouldn't you say?
Right. Yeah, I think she maybe branched out a little bit, and very little bit on the next record. But this one to me was this one. I mean, spoiler alert. This one's my overall favorite.
Yeah.
It
takes a really genius artist to only make 3 records because they're all going to be in our top 3.
It confounds our whole system. But some of the individual songs, he was a big freak. We talked about that with Dawnie. I mean, like the really eye-popping. I used to beat him with a turquoise chain.
Yeah,
just a great lyric.
I love 70s blues. In my notes here, it says it sounds like an alligator crawling through a subway tunnel.
I mean, Don't Call Her No Tramp.
Yeah, that's a great tune.
Another very direct lyrical concept. It's like, hey, I'm just living my life. Don't call me no tramp.
And then at the end of the record, she kind of begins this template, which I really love. That the closer song for her albums, downshift into a more mellow groove, not a ballad, but more of a reflective moment toward the end of the record.
Yeah, she kind of does that on all the records. So even the first one has "In the Meantime" is the closest thing to kind of like a mainstream kind of song. But yeah, she kind of always does end the record with kind of a vibey, sort of more like meditative kind of thing. Special People. It's kind of like a mood piece.
It is.
And again, another interesting lyric. It's about being in love with someone who's troubled and tortured. A lot of meaning behind the lyrics in these, if you really dig into them. But it's you might be tempted to overlook the lyrics because of her performance, but the songs all really do have kind of like subtle meaning.
I really do focus on the performance because it's so ear popping.
Yeah.
So I know, I'm sort of avoiding checking out the lyrics, but I'm getting obviously the gist.
There are these elements of like feminism and and freedom and and not being under anybody's control. There's a lot of that in the lyrics. It's there if you dig into them, for sure.
They're seeping into me subconsciously because I'm vibing to the groove.
I think it does
heavily.
that too.
Yeah.
It goes hand in glove with the music.
So this is a hard 5 for me.
Yeah, I gave this record a 5 as well. It's a funk classic. There's really nothing really exactly like it. I can't really. But that kind of her persona on it is so wild. And it's got such focus, and she did all of it. She wrote everything, produced.
If you hate it, it's her fault. If you love it, it's her fault. So the next,
she's in control. Let's put that way.
Yeah. So the next year brings 1975's Nasty Gal, which for all intents and purposes is her final album, even though she records a couple others. Nasty Gal failed commercially when it was released, and after it tanked, Island put her follow-up album, Is It Love or Desire, on the shelf, and that was when she kind of dissolved everything. But Nasty Gal remains as a testament. I think it's equally as good as the previous album.
Yep, it's very good. I'd say the sound is maybe a little bit more refined. This time she has her touring band, Funk House, is the backing band. And they would basically do all the remainder of her recordings. They're kind of the house band on everything. This one kind of combines the strengths of the first 2 records a little bit. It sounds a little bit better sonically. It's a little bit more tight and polished. Production's maybe a little bit better than They Say I'm Different. But it mixes up the moods a little bit more, branches out into some kind of new feels. There's a little bit more kind of slow burn stuff on this record. So it does feel like a little bit of a branching out from They Say I'm Different.
Yeah, when it slows down, it really works. But then the stuff that is not slowed down is grimier than ever. I mean, Nasty Gal, Getting Kicked Off, Having Fun, which that fucking song title is so good. But the slow burn stuff, let's talk about that. So You and I is a co-write with Miles Davis.
Yeah, so that's a pillowy, soft little ballad. That one's a real break from character. Shows off a completely different side of her singing voice. That one's a real gem. That one was one of my favorites.
How about this perfect lyric? I'm just a child trying to be a woman, and you're a strange one trying to be my man.
Yeah, that's a great song.
I love that.
Yeah.
Shut Off the Light is a great one. Man, that is such a good song.
Well, that's the other extreme of her performance, because her vocal is really unhinged in that one.
Right.
She's kind of at her most guttural and like feral in that song.
Yeah.
So she's showing a really wide range of persona just in this record. What else is on there? So Talking Trash has that great like 6/8 kind of bounce to it,
and that electric guitar in the chorus is so searing and furious.
Yeah, and it's written in that style where it's not really a song that's written per se. It's kind of a concept laid on top of a great funk vamp. And the concept is basically I can hang with you. You want to talk trash? I'm right there with you.
Well, that was her deal, right? That's how she wrote songs, right?
Yeah. So this one's very much in that style.
So my favorite slow burn thing she's ever done is the last song on her on this record, The Lone Ranger, which is almost ambient funk, and it's almost like she disappeared in a plume of smoke created by this song. That's what it feels like. Is after this she's gone.
Yeah, this is like the vibiest track of probably her whole career. It's all like
long too,
phasey guitar vibes, and she's kind of very like it's a very kind of sultry, kind of slow jam sort of thing.
Almost like a better Love to Love You Baby.
Right. Yeah. It's an amazing song. I think you're right. The kind of low key stuff on this album really works really well.
It pops, and it also makes the guttural stuff even that much more unhinged.
Yeah. This is a strong album.
It is. This one I give a hard 5.
Yeah,
to.
I give a 5 to this one as well.
So none of these records were commercial success or a hit, but she did have 2 hits on the Billboard R&B chart. So if I'm in luck, I might get picked up. Hit number 66 in 1973, and then Shut Off the Light reached number 97 in 1975. I don't know if you know that, Joe.
I did not know that.
Isn't that weird? That was a top 100 hit. So here's the deal with Betty. Here's the problem. So she was following her muse, without questioning it whatsoever, down whatever alleys it took her. And in addition to that, all the stuff externally, she was barred from performing on television. Okay, so some of her shows were boycotted. And then the radio ban because of religious groups and the NAACP, she was kind of effed. After Nasty Gal, in 1976, she recorded Is It Love or Desire, which remained unreleased until 2009.
Right, and so this one's pretty interesting. It seems a little bit. I was not quite clear from doing research on this whether it was actually fully finished, or whether it was abandoned, whether it was like near completed.
I'm with you as far as guesswork goes. It does feel like it's not quite done, but it
some
feels
of
like
them,
the pieces are in place.
Yeah, some of them sound a little bit like rough mixes. So I'm not really sure what the status of it was. But they had gotten into, they'd obviously made, at the very least, they made almost a full record.
Interestingly, this record, even though it's admittedly not as good as the 3 major records, her writing has actually gotten better on a lot of the tracks.
Yeah,
more personal.
And again, it seems like they're kind of trying to push the envelope of what they can do in funk. They're kind of branching out, I think, even more on this one. I wouldn't say they kind of have 100% successful. I don't think they stick the landing quite as much as they did on the previous ones. But again, it's not clear that they were actually fully finished making the record. She did this again with Funk House, her touring band, and they did it at this crazy studio in Bogalusa, Louisiana, which was like it's like a
studio in the country.
Yeah, it's like a swamp town. Some of the guys would say they'd see like alligators out on the streets. So. Kind of a crazy atmosphere to work in. It's definitely really interesting. I think the feral persona, the kind of like the unhinged, squealing, shrieking Betty is kind of more in the background a little bit.
Well, I think she's tasted failure at this point, and I think she's not just licking her wounds, but sort of seeing the writing on the wall. I mean, a song like Stars Starve, right. I mean, that's the trials and tribulations. This is a very emotionally raw song. This is not like, come have sex with me. This is I've reached the end of my tether.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, it's more of it feels more like a band kind of effort. There's more group vocals. There's some other vocalists who appear on it.
Hoary Angel has
Right.
Some dude screaming out with her. But there's some great tunes. Is it Love or Desire is great and just as good as anything else in her catalog, I think. It's so good.
Yeah, It's So Good has a real kind of like interesting take on funk. Very forward looking for when it was done. When Romance Says Goodbye, that one's kind of almost like minimalist kind of funk.
Bottom of the Barrel and For My Man. I want to mention those two. But I also want to mention the first two songs that I would call just mediocre. I'm only pointing this out because how many times can you say someone's great? I mean, everything she's done up to this point is great. So Let's Get Personal and Bar Hoppin' on side 2 are pretty mediocre. And without talking about the actual songs, what this imparts to me is that some of the wind has gone out of her sails. You can feel it on the album as it starts to drain away. Then the next one that comes out, you can really feel it, and then it's over.
Yeah, so she's probably aware at this point of all the hurdles that are in her way to being successful.
Great songwriting, slight concessions in genre restriction that feel less revolutionary than what came before. I give it 3.5 stars.
Yeah, I gave it the same, 3.5. And I should also mention the song Bottom of the Barrel, which is a direct, explicit attack on disco. It's basically a disco sucks kind of song. And it kind of makes the argument that funk is superior just by merely being a great funk song. It makes that argument.
Which makes the next record a little bit sadder because, not that it's a bad record, but 3 years later, she records Crashin' from Passion, which remains unreleased, but I just found out, I was today years old when I found out that this is coming out through, Light in the Attic?
Yes.
Good. So it's material from some 1979 recording sessions that was eventually used for 2 bootleg albums. One is Crashin' from Passion in '95, the template of which we used for this review, and Hanging Out in Hollywood from the next year. There's only a small handful of good songs on this.
Yeah, and there's a lot more kind of conventional R&B sort of stuff. There's, a few years prior, she was kind of doing the anti-disco diss sort of song. There are some things in this that are pretty much straight up disco.
And totally uninspired, and you can hear her going through the paces and being disconnected about the whole thing, too.
Yeah, so this one is kind of more of a genre tourist kind of thing, where she's kind of trying on a bunch of different, there's like kind of a reggae, like a bubbly reggae kind of thing on here.
This one, to me, is concession time because stars starve,
Right.
So there's the songs that I like are Quintessence of Hip, the first one. Another one of her funk-style roll calls. This time just a little bit slicker. Tell Me a Few Things is very good. Crashin' from Passion. And then, most importantly, the closer, which could very well stand as her farewell to the music industry and the world at large, You Take Me for Granted.
Yeah, so that one, You Take Me for Granted, kind of has like, almost kind of like a yacht rock, kind of like I don't know, it's sort of like a soft R&B kind of... but it does have it has an oddball kind of charm to it, and the message I think is very sincere. This is very different from the stuff that she's known for. You would not even guess it was with the same artist.
This seems to reflect the more of the the quiet Betty who left the music industry and never really did anything again except for one song.
Yeah, if you're looking for the kind of classic Betty stuff on here, it's the Quintessence of Hip is kind of in that style, and so is the title track Crashin' from Passion is kind of more typical of her classic period. Tell Me a Few Things as I liked a lot. That was one of my favorites from the record. It's kind of like it's sort of like jazzy sort of ballad.
By the way, I want to note that, this is still loaded with good players. You got Herbie Hancock on keyboards. You got Chuck Rainey on bass. Martha Reeves and the Pointer Sisters on backing vocals. This is an unreleased album with some of the best musicians there ever were.
Yeah, and I think if you pluck the best things, there's still some good stuff going on here.
And we have. So you want to go on our playlist.
These might not all be playlistable because this is not officially released yet. So.
We'll try.
Yes.
And if we can't do it, just find those 4 songs. That's all you need from this.
Right.
So in '79, that was it. Betty.
We got to give.
Sorry. That was 3 stars for me.
I gave this one the same 3 stars. I think rated everything identically.
That's weird.
I think this is the first time.
No, we didn't. I think the first one, the first single and the Columbia stuff.
Years, okay.
Yeah.
But otherwise, these are not
3 stars is generous.
Yeah, these aren't that hard to rate really, because the great ones are clear 5 stars.
If you start here, you will not give it 3 stars. If you end here, you will.
I think there's enough here to fully rate it 3 stars, because it's half of it's quite good, I think.
But the stuff that's bad is really fucking bad.
Right.
So Betty stopped making music, returned to Pittsburgh, where she has lived quietly ever since. I did talk about that Mojo article that I read about her recently within the last few years, which revealed quite the surprisingly shy, quiet, soft-spoken presence. A greatest hits album called Anti-Love, The Best of Betty Davis, was released in 2000. And then 19 years later, just pre-pandemic, Betty released A Little Bit Hot Tonight, her first new song in over 40 years, which was performed by Danielle Maggio, an ethnomusicologist who was a friend and associate producer on Betty, They Say I'm Different. It really does sound like she could have whipped this one right out at the tail end of the Nasty Gal sessions.
You can hear her songwriting voice in there. It sounds like a Betty Davis song.
It's crazy because it's decades later. I give this one 4 stars, and not just out of generosity. It's a great song.
I gave it 3.5.
You asshole.
A different rating.
You did that on purpose. All right, so February 9th, 2022, she passed away. I'd like to say that in August through September of 2021, I was voraciously listening to her music, compiling tons of notes for this episode, and we were just finally able to get it together right after her passing. But she'll definitely be missed. I hope that this episode attempts to and does something in the way of a course correction for her. As far as the arc of her career, there's no shape. She was great, and then she kept on being great right until she stopped.
Right, and it's all kind of one continuous sort of flurry of activity, that basically encompasses the 1970s, plus the couple extra things from the 60s. But yeah, I mean, all the records from the 3 records that were released, during her prime, you really can't go wrong with any of those. Those are really all kind of essential.
What's your top 3?
Number 3. I have Betty Davis, the eponymous debut. At number 2, I have Nasty Gal. At number 1, They Say I'm Different. For worst album, I have Crashin' from Passion. But if you don't consider that a real album, by default,
she doesn't have a bad album.
You have to have, I guess you'd rank is it Love or Desire would be the worst album, but there's not really
Columbia Years.
Yeah, even that. I mean, there's nothing that really would. It's just
no
maybe
worst
a
album.
less good album,
A less good album,
less amazing album.
So my top 3 is only very slightly different. Number 3 is Betty Davis, the eponymous one. Number 2 is They Say I'm Different. Number 1, Nasty Gal. But you could certainly make the argument to flip 1 and 2. Worst album is easily Crashin' from Passion. And for her, you definitely want to. You're going to want to go to the link to the playlist in the show notes, and also on our website discography.com. Check out the playlist. There's a lot of great material on this. Don't forget to visit the link in our playlist. It's in the show notes, and also on our website discography.com. You will find a Betty Davis playlist that is loaded to the gills with gold.
Yeah, and you can also in the link in the show notes, you can send us a voice memo if you want to weigh in with your opinion.
We'd love to know what your favorite album is by her, or if you disagree with us, we'd love to know.
And you can also do the same on our Facebook discussion group, which we'd love to hear from you on there as well. We will be interacting with you personally.
Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Discograffiti or on Instagram at DiscograffitiPod. Definitely follow us on Facebook. You got to hit that follow button, that subscribe button, please. And rate our podcast 5-star ratings only. Other ones are not allowed, especially if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
So I think that's about it, and that covers it.
Yeah. Join us next time on Discograffiti.
Lots of exciting episodes coming up, lots more additional content. We're working away very busily on these for you.
We are both having nervous breakdowns, trying to juggle family life, work life, and most importantly, show life. And so we'll see you next time on
Discography.